Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, trash. It's week 2 of my 10-week countdown to GarbAugust. So as you may have seen last Thursday, I'm doing a 10-week countdown to the beginning of GarbAugust at the start of August. GarbAugust, as I'm sure you know already, is a month dedicated to reading trashy books. Last week I talked about Hollywood Wives by Jackie Collins. This week I'm going to talk about 79 Park Avenue by Harold Robbins. So this is a piece of trash that's a lot older than Hollywood Wives. So Hollywood Wives came out in the 80s. This book, 79 Park Avenue, is from 1955 originally. And it definitely feels a bit like an older book. But by God, it was fun. It was really, really entertaining. It's not quite as lurid as Hollywood Wives was, but there is still an awful lot of grubby goings on to enjoy here. And Harold Robbins was an author who was famous for the inclusion of lots of sex in his books. Indeed, at the back of the Kindle edition of 79 Park Avenue that I read, there are some rather nice quotes from Robbins and from other people, one of which is from the judge in Philadelphia who lifted the ban on Harold Robbins' book Never Love a Stranger, which clearly was banned for its explicit content at some point in Philadelphia. And the quote from the judge is, "I would rather have my daughter learn about sex from the pages of a Harold Robbins novel than behind a barn door." I think of Philadelphia as not being a place with lots of barns, to be honest with you, but hey. So, 79 Park Avenue, so as I said, from 1955, and it's about effectively the life of a woman who is a sex worker. So her name is Marja, although she changes it to Mary Ann to kind of try and anglicise her name and get away from her Polish roots. And the book follows her life from kind of early adolescence up to kind of early middle age, I guess. And it's fascinating and really enjoyable, and it frames itself very nicely. So it frames itself around a trial that is happening in the present day. So in the present day for the book, so the 50s, at the end of the story, and then has the bulk of the book is taken up with flashbacks going chronologically through her life and leading you to an understanding of how she got to where she is. And where she is she's on trial for for running a house of ill repute. But it was really fun. So it's definitely very salacious, and deliberately so. But it handles sex, I think, in a not in quite as lurid a way as Hollywood Wives does. So whereas in Hollywood Wives, Jackie Collins seemed fascinated and amused by sex, and particularly by the idea of showing as many different kind of permutations of partners and things like that as possible, 79 Park Avenue felt to me more, I suppose, just more straightforward and honest about sex. So the sex in it is not explicit. There is a fair amount of it, but it's not particularly explicit. But it just feels more real for all of that. And I can understand that quote, from the judge, and the fact that Robbins was so popular because of the discussion of sex in his books. Because I think it's something that was not talked about maybe that much in the 50s in particular. It was very much a behind closed doors thing. So for it to be brought out into the open, albeit through the pages of a book, was probably quite refreshing. And I'm sure there are many people who, as the judge said, learned about sex in these books in a way that was, hopefully positive for them. So as I say, the story tracks, Marja's life through, and in particular her relationships with various men. So there are a bunch of different male characters in this book. The most important one being Mike Keyes, who is one of the district attorneys who is trying her for prostitution, in this wraparound present day section of the book. So their relationship is really interesting to watch progress through the pages of the story, as are her relationships with other men. And as you would expect in a story about prostitution, there's a heavy criminal element to to it. So there are many criminals that Marjorie gets involved with, who kind of encourage her, shall we say, on her road to becoming a madam, as well as characters on the right side of the law, shall we say, like Mike. So yeah, and it's full of melodrama and relationships breaking down and then picking back up again and all that kind of fun soap opera stuff. But its heart, whilst it is definitely a trashy book, and looking back on it, now, so 60, 70 years later, looking back on it, it feels probably more trashy than it did at the time. It does also feel like Harold Robbins had a motive behind writing the book. So trashy books may be pushed by their publishers on the sex that they contain, and so on and so forth. But I think the authors often do have loftier motives. So clearly there are some trash authors who just churn out books as quickly as possible to make money. But it feels like Robbins did have some sort of nobler motivation for what he was doing. And there's a nice quote here as well from Robbins about why he wrote the book. So let me just find that. So he says, people make their own choices every day about what they are willing to do. We don't have the right to judge them or label them. At least walk in their shoes before you do. 79 Park Avenue did one thing for the public. It made people think about these girls being real, not just hustlers. The book was about walking in their shoes and understanding. Maybe it was a book about forgiveness. I never know. The reader is the only one who can decide. And it does feel like he is definitely non-judgmental in the book. He presents the facts. Clearly they are fictional facts, but he presents the facts in terms of the story and the characters and how they relate to each other, and lets the reader make up their own mind about the morality of it all. What I found very interesting, and a tie back to one of the things I said was in my video about what is trash, one of the things I said was a defining characteristic of trash was that it is often something that picks up on something in the public mind more broadly and sensationalizes it and fictionalizes it. One of the characters, there is a very brief reference in 79 Park Avenue to something called the Jelco Trial. I may be pronouncing that name incorrectly. It's Jelke. So there's just one reference very, very late on in the book where one of the cops or DAs says, since the Jelco trial, blah, blah, blah. I can't remember the exact details. So I Googled it, and this was a real thing that had happened just a couple of years before 79 Park Avenue came out. So this was a big, big trial in New York of a guy called Jelco, who amusingly was the heir to a margarine fortune, who had been involved in running prostitutes and things like that. So it was but by the sound of it, there's not a great deal of information about it online now, but by the sound of it, at the time it was a big deal. So it was something that fascinated readers in the newspapers and things like that. So this definitely feels like, 79 Park Avenue definitely feels like it was trying to cash in on the public interest around prostitution that trial had kind of stirred up. So yes, that's my take on 79 Park Avenue by Harold Robbins. I enjoyed it a great deal. It's definitely cheesy. It's definitely kind of kitschy and amusing in some of its attitudes. But also it felt like it had a genuinely solid motive at its heart. And I did enjoy Marge's story and the various twists and turns of it. So I will definitely try more Harold Robbins. I've got the Carpetbaggers on order and a few other books by him, which I may try during GarbAugust. But yeah, it was definitely an entertaining read. So yeah, as always, hope you've enjoyed that. Hope you found it interesting. Hope you are safe and well and reading good stuff. And I will speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.